It's a war that has been ongoing for millennia. Ever since man began growing crops for food, animals have moved into his plantations and devastated them. Here in early spring, these crop devourers are still only larvae, dormant eggs, and slumbering worms. But soon, this armada of pests will launch their attack on the young plants. With the advent of chemical pesticides, man believed he had won the war against these pests. But these pesticides proved toxic for the environment and man's health. Yet there exists another weapon against these insects, one that's natural and non-polluting: other insects. This is called biological pest control, man sending his infantry into the fields to protect his harvest. A living insecticide, a fantastic idea, but hard to implement. It's not easy to use living beings to defeat other living beings. But across the world, scientists and farmers are convinced it's possible, thanks to biological control, to invent healthy and sustainable agriculture.
This plantation is just about the right age to be attacked by moths. The female moth lays her eggs in the leaves of the sugarcane. Then, once the larvae hatch, they bore into the stalks and then start to feed.
In Brazil, sugarcane plantations are under constant attack by a particular moth, Diatria saccharilis, the sugarcane borer, and its caterpillars cause big damage.
Here's a larva. It's already fed. It's bored a small gallery in the stalk, and this red part is the mold that's formed.
Diogo Carvalho is the CEO of a company that specializes in biological pest control. In Brazil, a champion of chemical pesticides, his work and his passion are to promote biological methods of crop protection.
Here. These are eggs of the sugarcane borer, which have already been treated. I can tell they've been destroyed because they're black. Now I'll show you how we treat the cane. Here, this is what we call the release card. The wasps leave here and lay their eggs inside the sugarcane borer's eggs.
Incredible but true. Tiny wasps protect these huge sugarcane plants. They surge out of these cards like warriors, climb up huge leaves, and they have to move fast. These wasps are parasites. They must find healthy, freshly laid eggs of the ravaging sugarcane borer to reproduce. The dance of death begins. In one egg after another, the wasps lay their own eggs and kill the moth embryos. The sugarcane borers will never see the light of day. From these eggs, young wasps will hatch, which will, in turn, parasitize other sugarcane borer eggs. Biological pest control is a powerful tool in the protection of crops, as has been proven in the past. Hans Herren has dedicated his life to defending crops in a green way. In the 1980s, he pioneered one of the world's biggest biological control programs. A marvelous story of a scientist and millions of insects which flew to the rescue of mankind. Back then, young entomologist Hans Herren was working in Nigeria. Cassava crops were being ravaged by a mealybug, accidentally introduced into West Africa a decade before. Before long, famine loomed.
The idea was, okay, so where does it come from? What is this new pest? People tried to spray this thing and nothing happened because it's very difficult to kill it with insecticide because it has a coating, a waxy surface, which basically protects it from almost anything. I came in there and they asked me, okay, what would you do? So I said, well, biocontrol.
Hans Herren and his team discovered a wasp that killed the cassava mealybug. Hundreds of thousands of these wasps were released into the cassava fields to decimate the pest. It was a total success.
As we released it, we could not believe our eyes how these things was multiplying and going and going. So it got established permanently, and now, 35 years after the first release, is still there doing its job.
A United Nations study estimated that the program saved over 20 million people from starvation.
We know that biological control is actually one of the best way of dealing with pest insects.
Protecting fields and orchards by using what nature has on offer. Selecting, breeding, and releasing small living beings to fight the insects and plants that ravage crops. Without polluting the soil, air, or water by introducing chemicals, biological control represents a kind of harmony between man and the earth that feeds us. Biocontrol works by using the natural enemies of pests to eradicate them. Man uses this rivalry and hostility, which already exist in nature, to his own advantage. And as species have evolved, they have found many ways to get rid of each other. Biological control uses predatory insects. The ladybird is man's ally. Released among the grapevines, it feasts on its favorite food, Pseudococcus viburni, a mealybug that sucks sap from vine leaves. This small wasp is a parasite. It lays its eggs inside the body of its main enemy, and its larva grows and metamorphoses, slowly killing its host. Living organisms such as microscopic roundworms, bacteria, and viruses are used by man in solutions. These are biopesticides which infect their preferred pest food. At Biotop, a French company specialized in biocontrol, research is underway to find a new ally for wine growers to attack predatory moths. Like their far-off cousins in Brazil, European species of tiny trichogramma wasps are involved.
I'm trying to find just the females. They're our allies because they lay the eggs. I pre-select the females, then double-check under the microscope to make sure I haven't made a mistake.
In the test tubes, the wasps are subjected to effectiveness tests to find those which will be most deadly to the pest and which will not attack other species of moth. That's a big challenge.
Lobesia botrana, the European grapevine moth, attacks vines. But we have a natural ally, trichogamma wasps, which are parasitoid, meaning they lay their eggs inside the grapevine moth's eggs. I take the egg-laying tubes of the grapevine moth. I take the female wasps that I've isolated, one female in each tube. Then I put it in contact with the grapevine moth's eggs. I close it and I'll open it 24 hours later.
So, will the female wasps lay their eggs? A lot, a few, or none at all? To understand what's going on inside the test tubes, we need to enter the most top-secret room in the research department. In this isolated room, over 700 species of trichogramma wasps live inside tubes. This is the testing bed, the possible treasure the researchers are hoping to unearth in order to find new allies of man. From one species of wasp to another, there are infinite genetic variations, but these could make a massive difference when faced with a pest. Diversity in a living creature is the foundation of biological control. "24 hours later, the researchers count the number of eggs in each tube parasiticized by the females of the various species of wasp.
How many do you have?
53. You?
35. You win.
Often, the researchers don't pinpoint the ideal insect to combat a particular pest. But the stock is vast, thousands of insects which could be excellent allies in our fight against enemy troops. The 21st century man hasn't invented a thing. A 2,000-year-old Chinese manuscript shows that man was already using biocontrol against crop pests by breeding certain ants to protect mandarin orchards. In the 19th century, Charles Valentine Riley was considered the pioneer of biological pest control. A brilliant entomologist, he came up with the idea of importing from Australia a beetle capable of decimating a pest that was devastating citrus plantations in California. It was a total success. The use of insects beneficial to farming spread across the globe. It was the golden age of biological control. Then it all came to a halt. In the 1940s, chemical pesticides invaded our fields. Easy to use and scarily effective, they swept aside all biological refinement. This agricultural model quickly spread across the globe. It wasn't until the 1960s that research into biological control gradually resumed. Behind the backs of chemical pesticides, our tiny allies took up the fight again.
It took a number of years, but now the large majority of greenhouses in France are using insects for pest control. Tomato growers, for example, but also more and more flower growers. In France, several dozen species are being used. On large surface areas, they're mainly trichogramma, parasitoid wasps, like the one used for corn, which is now used on up to 120,000 hectares in France.
Corn, sugarcane, cassava, citrus fruits, rice, cotton. Our tiny allies have forged an important place for themselves in the huge world of agriculture. Discreet and widely unknown to the general public, there are now about 230 species working on behalf of man. Few people know of the green lacewing larva, which loves to feast on the soft flesh of scale insects. Biological control needs to develop further in the future, since chemical pest control, faced with more and more resistance by pests, seems to have run out of steam. But even worse, with the world's growing population, the extension of arable land is creating new crop predators. Man is clearing woodland and forests, and the insects that live and feed on the plants growing there have invaded newly planted fields and are proliferating. Scientists are studying the mechanisms of this adaptation. Because, with all due respect to man, you're not born a pest, you become one.
We're currently in a period where lots of wild forests and greenery is being replaced by farmland. So what happens to the insects that were living in these wild spaces? And what threat do they pose to the new crops?
Laura Kaiser-Arnaud's research team is investigating whether certain forest-dwelling insects have a genetic predisposition to become pests. Under the scientists' microscopes is a small moth, Sesamia critica. Its larvae attacks grains, sorghum in Africa, and maize and corn in France. Like sugarcane borer larvae, they bore into the stems of plants.
Here you can see a borehole. And here you can see that the larva has eaten everything inside. All that remains is its waste. We're interested in this stem borer because we want to see whether an insect will move onto a cultivated plant or not. Because in East Africa, there are populations of stem-boring moths that continue to feed on wild plants, even when there are cultivated plants nearby. Whereas in Mediterranean countries, there are large populations which feed on maize and sorghum.
Whether it's a French sesamia or a Kenyan sesamia, it's the same species. But in France, the larva has adapted to farmed maize, whereas in Africa, it continues to feed on wild maize. The team is observing the feeding behavior of two sesamia populations. At the same time, they're gradually deciphering the genetic variations that predispose an insect to become a pest. They have identified what's known as a foraging gene, which seems to be strongly involved in this behavioral change. They've already come up with one amazing result. It's actually extremely difficult for an insect to adapt to man-grown crops.
There are few species that can live on crops. For example, there are about 150 species of moth whose larvae bore their way into herbaceous plants in Africa, and among that 150, only 4% are grain pests. But in crop fields, they develop huge populations.
Wild species that become pests. Pests which become resistant to chemical pesticides. And to top it all, a host of living species brought in from elsewhere as the world economy goes into overdrive. Every year, 30 or so exotic species, fortuitously introduced into Europe, manage to become permanent residents. It's estimated that a third of these animals and plant species will become long-term threats to our crops and biodiversity. René Sforza is a researcher at a biological control lab set up by the United States Department of Agriculture. His mission is to find an ally insect to halt the proliferation of a plant across America. He's now working at the herbarium of the Paris Natural History Museum because this plant arrived from Europe.
Oh, look. We have new specimens here.
What do we have here?
It's a specimen from Lot, Central France. And let's see.
Okay.
This is
Where is it?
from 1873, so it's quite old. Well, smaller specimen.
In this global crisscrossing of species, each country is exotic to another. Europe has been invaded, but some European species are also ravaging other parts of the world.
We're working on a species of grass that has invaded the whole of the western United States. It's called wiregrass, or doubtful oat, from its Latin name, Ventinata dubia. When it arrived in the United States in the 50s or 60s, it wasn't a problem at first. It was later that the species proliferated and became truly invasive.
Wiregrass now covers millions of hectares of American prairie land. It's a scourge for ranchers because it's poisonous to cattle.
My task is to study the regions of its origin and to catalog its natural enemies, which might be insects, such as mites, or pathogens, such as fungi, viruses, and bacteria. I'm trying to work out how all this lives together with the final aim of introducing one of these biological control species into North America to control the plant over there.
Renee Sforza and Dorothy Maguire based their biological control work on acclimation. Extremely detailed work that will allow an introduced ally to survive in its new environment and decimate the undesirable species without affecting local flora and fauna. Three months on, and the scientists are attempting to uncover their much sought-after plant in a landscape stretching out before them. In a twist of fate, wiregrass, which is proliferating in the American prairies, is very rare in Europe and on the verge of extinction. They're accompanied by a German botanist who knows where to look.
So there's a place where we might find Ventinata.
Right here?
Yeah, it's right here. That's the first site. It used to be a very good site for Ventinata, but this year with all the straw, I don't know if we really find it, but well, let's see. See over there, it's all filled with Ventinata.
Oh yeah.
Look there, eh?
There's lots of it here. It's everywhere. All these plants welcoming us with open arms. This is definitely Ventinata dubia, or doubtful oat. The grain is nice and plump, so we can pick these and germinate them.
So I'm collecting the soil that's surrounding the roots because we want to know what kinds of conditions Ventinata likes to grow in. So we hope to also understand if there are maybe some microorganisms in the soil that facilitate or inhibit the growth of Ventinata. So perhaps understanding what's in the soil can give us clues as to why it's so rare in Europe and so abundant and invasive in North America. Yeah.
Is there anything in here which might control wiregrass? Nothing immediately stands out. It's a funnel process. We collect a lot of species, but in the end we only retain 2 or 3 of them. The plant population here is quite sparse, so the enemy population will be too. But we're just beginning and we're optimistic, and we have to stay optimistic.
In a few years, a European insect or fungus may be introduced into the United States to control wiregrass. And American cattle will be able to rediscover their original grazing land. In the meantime, work goes on. Introducing an exotic species into a country isn't an easy task. In the past, attempts at biological control have ended in failure. In the 1980s, a small insect was imported into the States to fight against aphids, the Asian harlequin lady beetle. The ladybug's larva, very different from the adult beetle, is a voracious predator, making it a good ally. But things soon begin to go wrong. The Asian harlequin lady beetle had a much more varied diet than foreseen. It attacked and ate indigenous ladybugs, gradually replacing them. The truth is that certain ally predators haven't been as specific as scientists claimed and have become major hitches in the biological control plan.
The harlequin ladybug, Harmonia exeritis. This is it, native to China. It was introduced into Quebec in Canada, the United States, and France, and now it's in Britain, Belgium, and so on. It was imported as a beneficial insect, but it gradually became a nuisance because it poses problems that hadn't been foreseen. Invasion of the human habitat, dispersion. So now it's an insect we no longer want, and we're trying to control it. It's an insect that shouldn't be used again for biological control, that's for sure.
The damage caused by the introduction of the Asian harlequin ladybug would sadly give the general public a very negative view of biological pest control.
On the discussion around biocontrol is always the big question, is this dangerous? Are we going to actually mess up the environment with introductions?
The fact that biological control poses problems is a good thing because it shows that it's applied ecology. It's not just engineering where you produce insects and release them. No, it's a real scientific, academic, and ecological question that needs to be studied.
When you do find an insect somewhere, you go through a quarantine process, you identify, make sure that you know what it is, you make sure that what it feeds on, what it is reproduction, what it is like and don't like. So basically you do all this research, and if you do that research well, you do minimize the chance of something going wrong.
Between the calculated risk of introducing an insect and the damage caused by some chemical pesticides, what's the right choice? 120 years' worth of scientific data shows that 99% of biological control programs have been at the best effective and at the worst caused little damage to biodiversity. The hoverfly larva is an ally. It's effective and not dangerous. It eats the aphids which suck out the sap from apple trees. A plane spreading insecticides? No. It's a biological control plane dropping 400,000 eggs of tiny trichogramma wasps per hectare of plantations. Across the globe, biocontrol is now being used to treat intensive farming. In Brazil, about 4 million hectares of sugarcane benefit from these parasitoid fairy godmothers. Here, the wasps weren't introduced. They're native to the country. They're simply increased in number when pests go on the attack. This is biological control by increase. Cheryl Ivia Hauf is in charge of a sugarcane plantation of 7,000 hectares. The plants are used to produce sugar, but also ethanol or motor fuel. Chemical products such as herbicides are used on the plantation, but parasitoid wasps are the main treatment against sugarcane borer larvae.
I believe biological control to be a sustainable means of creating a cohabitation between pests, the plantation, and parasitoids. The results are very positive, but you need to be persistent. I believe in it much more than in chemical control.
Biological control requires particular attention. The number of pest moths present on the plantation must be constantly assessed. Traps are set. And once the number of captured sugarcane borers rises above a certain threshold, the sign of infestation, a new release of wasps is launched. Releases take place 3 or 4 times a year. They can also be done on foot. Laborers place carts filled with wasp eggs. On intensive monoculture plantations, a biological control is eternally renewed because it's impossible to obtain a sustainable balance between the pest population and the ally population.
The wasps parasitize the sugarcane borer eggs, but then continue to parasitize other eggs and multiply until the point that there are no eggs at all on the plantation.
The tiny wasps are introduced into the vast fields. Their range of action is so low that they're soon unable to find other species' eggs in order to reproduce, and most of them die. The more mobile sugarcane borer can easily fly from field to field. And in this immense landscape where only sugarcane grows, there's always a haven where sugarcane borer moths can gather, ready to attack.
When the pests return, the indigenous population of parasitoids is too low and can't effectively protect the plantation. What we do at BUG is to breed these parasitoids and send them in massive quantities to farmers so that they can release them at the ideal moment so that control is completely effective.
These are the eggs that will be spread around the fields. Every gram contains 36,000 eggs. The mass production of easy-to-deploy wasps requires a very clever trick. Trichogramma galloi usually needs the eggs of the sugarcane borer to reproduce. But man has found a way to dupe it by presenting it with the eggs of another pest, the common flower moth, Anagasta cuiniella, which is very easy to breed. And the trick has worked. It means that to breed billions of trichogramma wasps a week, you have to breed billions of flower moths.
The lab's biggest challenge is to breed large quantities of Anagasta cuiniella. In these boxes, we're raising larvae, which will metamorphose into flower moths. A box like this contains about 6,000 fully grown larvae, and we produce up to 10,000 boxes a week.
10,000 boxes, 6 kilos of insect eggs produced each week. The wonderful notion of biological control gets a little lost in such intensive breeding. But releasing wasps is much more preferable to chemical insecticides. With the tiny parasitoids, the bioprotection of crops has reached an unprecedented level of effectiveness. Biological control has other weapons up its sleeve, allies that are even smaller than insects. Microscopic allies such as bacteria, viruses, and fungi are known as biopesticides. They kill pests by making them sick. In the world of the infinitely small, the future of biological control is being laid out. In Laura Kaiser Arnaud's laboratory, we rediscover the larva of the Sesamia critica snuggled up in its stalk. The researchers have begun a new study on this stem-boring moth larva. In Africa, Sesamia critica is attacked by a parasitoid wasp, but nothing like the tiny trichogramma. The Cotacea carries a virus which acts specifically on Sesamia critica. A virus that's hyperspecific to one particular pest, the stuff of dreams. The scientists want to discover how this terrible virus acts, allowing the Cotacea wasp to reproduce at the expense of the poor Sesamia.
The particularity of the Cotacea is that it lays its eggs in larvae. I'll place the female parasite close to the Sesamia larva. Its sharp stinger, transformed into an egg-laying tool, injects its eggs into the larva. There, it's laying. The larva tries to get rid of it with its mandibles, but it's too late. The parasitoid wasp has deposited a virus. In fact, the female produces viral particles, and these particles are injected into the larva along with the eggs, inhibiting the larva's immune system.
The aim of the wasp is to keep the larva alive but defenseless. Thanks to the virus that blocks the Sesamia larva's immune system, the Cotacea eggs can calmly develop inside the larva, gradually eating it from the inside. The Sesamia larva will survive for 2 weeks, enough time for the Cotacea larvae to emerge from the corpse. Now it's up to man to understand the incredible refinement of the parasitoid behavior of the Cotacea wasp. To invent the biological pest control of the future, we will have to copy and even surpass the destructive ingenuity of insects. Back in the outside world, the pests are still there. While man continues to plan his attacks on them, they are evolving, adapting, and perfecting their defenses. The codling moth is an orchard pest. In early summer, its larvae love to bore into the flesh of young apples. Codling moth larvae can destroy over 80% of an orchard's fruit. But man found a very effective biopesticide to fight this pest. But due to its overuse, the inevitable happened. Codling moth larvae became resistant to it. It seems that biological control is now facing the same problems faced by chemical control. Miriam Sigvart works at a lab that studies, for the whole of France, the resistance of insects to both chemical and biological pesticides. Codling moths are regular visitors to her pipettes.
I'm feeding codling moth larvae with a granulovirus, a virus used as a biopesticide in orchards to fight pest insects. Some of these insects have become resistant to the virus, so we're trying to determine whether these insects carry it or not. Once the larvae have ingested the virus, it will infect their alimentary canal and make it sick. We'll leave them to incubate for 5 days, and we'll monitor the development of the symptoms.
The granulosis virus isn't the first biopesticide to come up against insects resistant to its effects. Since 1985, bacteria-based biopesticides, or BTs, used worldwide are encountering the same problems.
As soon as a new product comes on the market, resistance appears quite quickly. So the aim is to know where and when resistance appears to try to better restrict it, so that pesticides have a longer life.
The lab is studying the physiological mechanisms of the codling moth's resistance to the granulosis virus. Usually, the virus takes an average of 6 days to kill an infected larva. The larva loses weight, turns pale, then liquefies from the inside out.
With resistant insects, during the early phase of the infection, soon after the virus has entered the intestinal cells, the virus can't replicate. It's as if there were a cellular incompatibility between the virus and the resistant insects.
Scientists have still not figured out the cellular mechanisms that enable the larva of the codling moth to block the replication of the virus. But they do know they're confronted with a new form of particularly strong resistance. Insects are champions in the art of survival. The appearance of resistances isn't the death knell for biopesticides because they are, and always will be, treatments without residue and without danger to man's health. All these pests are screaming at us to abandon intensive farming, which is over-dependent on all kinds of products.
When we analyzed the present situation of the agriculture, we said that we need to change the paradigm. So the paradigm change was actually meant to be going away from large-scale, monocrop type agriculture. And so we said, no, we need to change this. So we need an agriculture which is close to nature.
In India, as a result of problems caused by the massive use of chemical pesticides, several states have changed course and are opting for the bioprotection of crops. In the state of Telangana, a third of all farmland has gradually abandoned the use of chemical products. Biological pest control has become a major challenge. In the state capital, Hyderabad, the Center for Sustainable Agriculture gives support to farmers who choose to adopt this method.
CSA, Center for Sustainable Agriculture, we began our journey in 2004, 10 years back. And our main mission is to make agriculture and agriculture-based livelihoods sustainable, economically sustainable, at the same time ecologically sustainable. So what we tried is to communicate directly to the farmers that chemical pesticides are not needed, and if restoration of ecosystem can be done, you don't need to use pesticides. That's the message which we wanted to give it to the farmers in loud and clear.
In India, a new form of biological control is developing based on conservation. Conservation biological control aims to transform the environment and change the layout of farmland to offer the perfect living conditions for the natural enemies of pests, thus producing a sustainable balance between the pest and ally populations. No allies are released in their thousands or millions. Not a single ladybug or wasp. Our allies live in the fields, peacefully, all year round. Chandra Sekhar and Yadava Reddy of the Center of Sustainable Agriculture are closely monitoring insect life in cultivated fields. For the greater good of the farmer, things are buzzing.
Looks like, hey, here it is, whatever egg mass is there, it's newly hatched.
Yes.
See the young larvae. This is basically a foliage feeder, which is mostly seen on cotton, then in tomato, groundnut. And there are also natural enemies we can find. Here it is the Chrysopella eggs are there.
Standing at attention like guards of the plantation, green lacewing eggs are waiting to hatch so as to launch their attack on Spodoptera larvae. On the ground, glowworms set off to attack snails and slugs. Carnivorous spiders love sucking all the juices from herbivorous insects. Fields are part of what is known as the agro-system, a system that combines various crops with hedges, copses, and meadows reserved for wild plants. A reservoir of living species, both animal and vegetal, which provides strength and protection.
I think fruit fly is there. Seems all the tender fruits are becoming dry.
Conservation biological control methods aren't miraculous. The balance on farmland is fragile and the farmer must remain vigilant.
See this?
The only way to reinforce this type of farming is to increase knowledge and awareness.
You need to bring in new knowledge. So that new knowledge is a synthesis of the old knowledge, new knowledge, and also contemporary understanding of ecosystem. So we actually call ecological farming as a postmodern technology.
Dynamic fields, healthy plants. What works here in India could be applied elsewhere. Over 75% of farms in the world resemble Indian ones, small and family-run.
We have to do more in biological control and use more science to make it more efficient, to improve its impact, reduce its costs, and make it really, in the end, more attractive also for the farmers.
Control through acclimation, increase conservation. The different forms of biological pest control can thoroughly redesign and transform the agricultural world. And in this renewed agricultural world, chemical products would only be used as a very last resort.
There's more and more pressure from influential groups and from the general public for farmers to use more and more natural means of crop protection. Biological pest control is the best way to achieve that. It requires a change of gear and vision, but we're capable of it. Capable as scientists, capable as a society, and capable politically. It's doable, and it will happen.
Biological pest control offers us a world as beautiful and complex as life itself, a world that we need right now. Currently, only 5% of farmland in the world benefits from one form or another of bioprotection. Our small allies are showing us the way. Why are we waiting to follow them? Wasps, ladybugs, viruses, and fungi are the future of mankind.